Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming. I'm Michael Thaddeus, professor of mathematics at Columbia University. Being a mathematician, I'm unaccustomed to public speaking, except about group theory, commutative algebra, topics like that. But this is an emergency, as we know, and this press conference, we think of this as a press conference, not a demonstration. I think there will be no chanting, no marching, but it had to be held on an urgent basis. We have about a half dozen speakers who will come up one after another after me. Each will speak for a few minutes, and then we'll have a press availability afterwards. Besides being professor of mathematics, I'm also vice president of the Columbia chapter of the American Association of University Professors. The AAUP was founded, actually, at Columbia in 1915. Thank you. And its co-founder was the great philosopher John Dewey. Ever since that time, one of its primary concerns has been academic freedom. Academic freedom has been thought to be a privilege of professors, covering our speech on academic subjects and protecting us from retaliation by our own institutions. The case of Mahmoud Khalil, which we're gathered here to discuss today, is somewhat different. It involves the right of free expression and freedom of speech in its broadest sense. Mr. Khalil is a U.S. national, but that did not protect him from being arrested by immigration police and spirited off to an undisclosed location after he was targeted and denounced by right-wing provocateurs, including some at our own institution. It therefore implicates the most basic First Amendment rights to free speech that as Americans we all cherish. Nevertheless, it has everything to do with academic freedom and the concerns of the AAUP. Many of our faculty, even our tenured professors, like Mr. Khalil, are green card holders, permanent residents of the United States. And many of them, scientists, historians, cultural critics, have said things in the course of their scholarly careers that are noxious to the present administration in Washington. The attack on Mahmoud Khalil is intended to make them quake in their boots and to make all of us quake in our boots. Our message to Washington is that we are not silenced, we are not afraid, and we stand together determined to defeat this ongoing assault on our fundamental rights. Mahmoud Khalil has not been credibly accused of any violent act. He has not been charged with any crime. If he is guilty of anything, it is guilt by association. Trump's border czar, Tom Homan, alleged on Fox News that Mr. Khalil has been locking down buildings and destroying property. If there's a shred of evidence supporting these allegations against Mr. Khalil, I have yet to see it. No, his only offense has been exercising his constitutional rights to free speech and peaceful assembly. Anything else is a hot take from those who get their news from Twitter and TikTok. Students like Mr. Khalil flock to the United States from every corner of the globe, in large part because of our reputation as a beacon of liberty. Here, the world thinks someone cannot be summarily arrested and imprisoned merely for expressing an opinion or advocating a political cause. The case of Mahmoud Khalil has dealt a severe blow to that trust placed in us by the world. My activist colleagues behind me on the faculty have for many years circulated petitions and signed open letters in support of political prisoners held by authoritarian regimes in places like Russia, China, and Iran. Now we're facing a horrifying reality that our own student, a member of the Columbia community, has become a political prisoner here in the United States. This is a dismal moment in American history. We must not go down this authoritarian path one step further. Let's not let this happen in the United States of America. Thank you very much. it's a very great honor to present Donna Lieberman, who's the president and CEO of the New York Civil Liberties Union. On a personal note, I must say that I have observed her work on the ground for decades. She is, among all civil libertarians, the one who walks the walk just as much as she talks the talk. And it's a great honor to introduce her.
Thank you all for coming out today. The New York Civil Liberties Union stands with the students and faculty at Columbia to condemn the Trump administration's cruel and unlawful detention of Mahmoud Khalil. It is beyond the pale. It's targeted, retaliatory, and an extreme attack on the First Amendment. And it reeks of McCarthyism. We call on the government to release Mr. Khalil immediately. Let's be clear. The First Amendment protects everyone in the United States. And this unlawful arrest and detention are obviously intended to intimidate and chill speech that the Trump administration doesn't like, not just here in New York, but all across the country. And let's be clear on something else. The federal government has no authority to strip Mr. Khalil or any other lawful permanent resident of their status for participating in a public debate and advocating positions that the Trump administration doesn't like. Political speech or speaking out should never be the basis of punishment or lead to deportation. And what's more, Mr. Khalil, like every other green card holder, has a right to due process of law. The arrest and detention of Mahmoud Khalil is a gross violation of his constitutional rights and an abuse of immigration law. It comes as the Trump administration is trying to ramp up ICE raids and sow fear all across the city, all across the state, all across the country. But we will stand up to the Trump administration. We will not be silenced. We urge Columbia to stop pandering to the Trump administration. We urge Columbia to stand up for your students, to stand up for your faculty, to stand up for academic freedom and democracy. Stand up and speak out to defend Mr. Khalil and demand his immediate release. Free Mahmoud now! Free Mahmoud now! Free Mahmoud now! Thank you. Free Mahmoud now!
Our next speaker is another professor, Yinan Cohen, Yerushalmi professor at Columbia and fellow of the Institute for Israel and Jewish Studies.
Thank you all for coming. And I'm indeed a member of the Institute of Israel and Jewish Studies at Columbia University. And the arrest of Mahmoud Khalil is deeply concerning and reminded me of the unlawful way the Israeli military treats Palestinians in the occupied territories. In the West Bank, the Israeli military often comes at night and abducts Palestinians from their home, wrongly alleging that political activists are members of a terrorist organization. As an Israeli American, I'm extremely troubled that such practices have been imported to the United States and manifest themselves on our campus. Rescinding visas, canceling green card, and intimidating students and staff have become the tool of choice for stifling free speech and undermining the First Amendment. Columbia University includes Christians, Muslim, Jews, Hindus, Sikhs, and athletes. And none of us will be safe unless we're all safe. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Professor Nadia Abu El-Haj, the Ann Whitney Olin Professor in the Departments of Anthropology at Barnard College and Columbia University, and co-director of the Center for Palestine Studies.
Thank you. Mahmoud Khalil has been a public face of the student movement at Columbia Barnard since last spring. During the encampment, he served as the lead negotiator with the Columbia administration. A mature and gentle human being and a politically sophisticated thinker, Mahmoud tried his best to bring a peaceful end to that encampment. In the same spirit, Mahmoud tried to negotiate a resolution between students and the Barnard administration last week during a sit-in at Milstein Hall. He was filmed participating in that sit-in or being present there, and as a result, various people tweeted, including one of our colleagues, directly at Marco Rubio asking for his arrest and deportation. A Palestinian refugee raised in Damascus, Mahmoud fled to Beirut when it became too dangerous to live in Yarmouk. He eventually made his way to the US to study. Now incarcerated in a detention center in Louisiana, his green card revoked. He is at serious risk of deportation. He may well be displaced again. Mahmoud's story, in short, is the Palestinian story par excellence. But let us be clear, Mahmoud has been detained for his political speech. It is political speech that some of our colleagues and students and many agitators outside the university and the college do not like. It is political speech that they have tried to shut down by slandering Palestinians and pro-Palestinian protesters as anti-Semites, and even as providing material support for terrorism, with absolutely no evidence to back it up. So let me say to all of you who have fashioned and promoted this narrative, that is, to each and every member of Columbia's Task Force on Anti-Semitism, to every colleague who has tweeted unsubstantiated accusations at individual students and student groups, and to the small group of Columbia students who have done the same, and to each of you outside the university who have participated, you did this. Your political speech has produced entirely foreseeable material consequences. Mahmoud is not safe, and that is not a matter of how he feels. He is in real danger, and each of you bear substantial moral responsibility for that fact. The narratives you have promoted have demonized and increasingly helped to criminalize simply being Palestinian in this country. And Mahmoud Khalil is paying an unconscionable price. Thank you. Yes.
Next, I'm very proud to introduce Councilmember Sean Abreu, who represents me and much of the Columbia community in the New York City Council.
Hello. Well, good evening, everybody. If you think the people rescinding research grants, brandishing ICE as a tool for intimidation, and slashing offices dedicated to protecting civil rights give a damn about protecting students, you're wrong. I'm Councilmember Abreu, and I'm the son of immigrants. And immigrants know a thing or two about ICE. ICE is not about safety, ICE is about fear. I'm also a lawyer, and there's a thing or two I know about the Constitution. I know that in America, we believe in due process. And if you think the people who brought ICE to our doorstep care about safety, you are wrong. I'm here to let you know that we are paying attention and that we need to fight against this authoritarian regime. Thank you, everybody.
Our next speaker is Professor Nara Milanic of Barnard College from the Executive Board of the Barnard chapter of the AAUP.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here. Can everybody hear me? Thank you, colleagues, for being here. Thank you, members of the Free Press, as long as it lasts, for joining us here today. My name is Nara Milanic. I'm the chair of the Department of History at Barnard College, but I'm speaking to you today as a member of the Executive Committee of the Barnard chapter of the AAUP, the American Association of University Professors. As my colleague Michael said a moment ago, the AAUP was founded over 100 years ago to defend the basic principle of academic freedom, which refers to the freedom of faculty to teach, to research, and to speak out, as some of us are doing here today. This is my 20th year at Barnard, and I teach Latin American history. My academic background in Latin America has given me a sobering perspective on events in the last couple of weeks. Last summer, I was in Buenos Aires, Argentina, where I had the opportunity to visit an organization that provided legal services to the families of political prisoners during the dictatorship in the 1970s. Walking through the hallways of that organization, I passed boxes and boxes and boxes of files. My host told me that they were stuffed with hundreds and maybe thousands of writs of habeas corpus. These are petitions that the organization filed seeking the release of political prisoners who had been abducted and disappeared by the military dictatorship. When I read that Mahmoud Khalil's lawyer had filed a writ of habeas corpus on his behalf, I thought of those boxes of files. I thought of the many disappeared in Argentina, in Chile, in Brazil, and elsewhere. These dictatorships specifically targeted students, and they targeted faculty, and they targeted them for their political beliefs. I thought of the memorial tiles dotting the sidewalk at the entrance to the University of Buenos Aires, commemorating members of the university community lost to the dictatorship. Universities cannot exist when students are persecuted, arrested, and disappeared for their political beliefs. They can't exist when administrators call the police onto campus to resolve deep differences and difficult tensions with guns and zip ties. Universities cannot exist when their leaders do not stand up for the basic values of teaching, learning, expression, research, inquiry, and debate. Our worst enemy at this moment is the idea that the terrible things that happen during authoritarian dictatorships elsewhere could somehow never happen here, but they can happen, and indeed, we must acknowledge that some of those things are already happening. The AAUP calls on our students, faculty, and staff to stand together and to defend one another, as well as the principles of academic freedom. But we must recognize that this grievous attack on our university community is also an attack on our city, on our country, and we therefore call on all people of good conscience to stand up for democracy, to stand up for due process, and to stand up for our most basic constitutional rights. Thank you.
Our next speaker is Professor Mariana Hirsch, the William Peterfield Trent Professor Emerita of English and Comparative Literature and of the Institute for the Study of Sexuality and Gender at Columbia.
Thank you all for being here. Can you hear me? It's hard. There's a chill in the air, and it's not from the early March wind. It's the chill of fear and despair that is all too familiar to me. Since Mahmoud Khalil was detained on Saturday, it has brought back my most tormenting childhood memories. Oh. Since Mahmoud Khalil was detained on Saturday, it has brought back my most tormenting childhood nightmares. I grew up as a child in communist Romania, the daughter of Holocaust survivors, in the 1950s. A knock at the door, the sound of a doorbell were never innocent occurrences. They recalled my parents' wartime stories of hiding, trying to evade deportation, hearing their neighbors being taken away. But for me as a child, they could mean that the Securitate, the security police, was coming from my parents. There was no schoolmate, teacher, or neighbor that could be trusted not to denounce us. And for what? Well, there was never a lack of a pretext to arrest enemies of the state, often a code word for Jews. But during all that frightening time, there was a word that offered hope of the possibility of living freely. And that word was America, or as my mother pronounced it, America. Surely a bit naive, but we came here believing in it, and a lot of me still does. I've spent my career, or a good part of my career, teaching about fascism and the memory of the Holocaust, so that what is happening now should never happen to anyone. I've spent the last year and a half working with a number of committed Jewish colleagues to preserve these basic freedoms on this campus. Freedom of expression, freedom to protest, freedom to speak out and to act against injustice. My committed Jewish faculty colleagues and I have warned that the false characterization of Columbia as a hotbed of anti-Semitism would be used as an alibi for what's actually at stake for the Republican establishment and now the Trump administration. Strict control of speech, of protest, and of higher education at large. It should be obvious to everyone that what's happening on this campus, or should I say to this campus, is not about protecting Jews. Sadly, the Columbia anti-Semitism narrative has been promoted and amplified by the Anti-Semitism Task Force and by this administration, and Columbia administration has conceded on every single point. Our group of Jewish faculty have argued vociferously for a clear distinction between an understanding of anti-Semitism as anti-Jewish hatred, which certainly exists, and the false narrative that criticism of Israel's brutal war on Gaza, a war that many experts agree is genocidal, can be equated with anti-Jewish sentiment. Student activism is not support of terrorism or of Hamas's violent attacks on October 7th. That's a shameful and deeply mischaracterizing conflation that is being repeated in the press. I'm glad you're here to hear me say this is not right. Pro-Palestinian speech and activism does not mean a lack of safety for Jews anywhere. The illegal detention and threatened deportation of a student who is a green card holder have made everyone here unsafe, as my colleagues have been saying. Undocumented international students and faculty on visas, green card holders, and who knows, even naturalized citizens like myself. Not to speak of minorities and women and Jews. The chill in the air now is the fear and despair we feel as Columbia is being made a test case for the detention of activists and with announced funding cuts for the decimation of higher education in the U.S. Thanks.
Our next speaker is Rabbi Jason Klein, the senior rabbi at Congregation Beit Simchat Torah.
Hi, I'm Jason Gary Klein, Columbia College class of 1997, and senior rabbi at CBST, a congregation that is serving people of all sexual orientations and gender identities. As a Columbia alumnus, I was shaken both by the news of $40 million of federal funds being withheld from Columbia by the Trump administration, and I was also shaken by President Armstrong's email over the weekend and the links that it contained, because they appeared to exploit anti-Semitism rather than actually have a cogent plan to combat it. And Mahmoud Khalil, I am mortified as an American, as a Jew, and as an alumnus of this institution that you have been taken into ICE custody, and I cannot even imagine what you and your family are going through right now. President Armstrong, I am concerned that you may not have done enough to protect Mahmoud Khalil and his family. This week's Torah portion, Ki Tisa, describes a vacuum in leadership that leads our ancestors to create an idol. One reason this section of the Torah is notable is because even Moses' brother Aaron, the de facto leader of the Jewish people in Moshe's place, takes no responsibility for the construction of the golden calf. Unfortunately, it's a very human thing to do, to shirk responsibility. Let's stop doing that. Let's not let each other off the hook for it. Today, we're calling out the outrageous absence of moral leadership coming from the highest offices in this country. I condemn the detention of Mahmoud Khalil and the withholding of federal funds from Colombia. They are not in Jewish safety. They are not in the interest, they are not in the interest of Jewish safety. They are a distraction from real acts of anti-Semitism, and they rely on weaponizing anti-Semitism. They rely on exploiting people's worst instincts to capitulate to tyranny. Whether or not I or anyone agrees with a particular opinion of a fellow Columbia lion, whether or not I or anyone agrees with the opinion of a fellow Columbia lion, it would be a grave mistake for any of us as Jews to forget that liberties such as free speech and the right to due process have allowed us to thrive in this country as well. So if you agree with one of Mahmoud's opinions, we haven't actually been on a first-name basis, Mr. Khalili's opinions, you may be outraged. And if you disagree with Mahmoud Khalil, I suggest that this is a good time to be even more outraged, because what happened to Mahmoud can happen to anyone. So let us call on ICE for Mahmoud Khalil's release. Let us call on the release of federal funds to Colombia, and let us call on Alma Mater to fight on for victory evermore, the victory of intellectual honesty and the victory of American liberty. Thank you.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Professor Sonia Posmentier, who's Associate Professor of English at New York University, and she's here to represent the Sanctuary Campus Network.
Hi, can you all hear me? Yeah. My name's Sonia Posmentier. I'm a faculty member downtown at New York University. I'm also a member of the Executive Council of NYU's chapter of AAUP. So I'm here in solidarity with my colleagues at Barnard and Columbia, and in solidarity with Mahmoud Khalil to demand his release from ICE custody, and to call also on Barnard College to reinstate students who've been expelled for protesting the war on Gaza by Israel with arms from the U.S. I'm also here, as was said, as a member of the Sanctuary Campus Network, which is a new formation of college and university individuals from across the U.S. and Canada. There are currently over 1,000 people in that network, so I can't say that I'm representing all of them, but I'm here to say a little about the Sanctuary movement and the Sanctuary Campus movement. Sanctuary as a political practice and moral principle has deep religious and secular roots reaching back thousands of years. More recently, as many of you may know, in the 1980s, the new Sanctuary movement was one expression of transnational organizing to provide safety to refugees fleeing civil wars and genocide in Central America, and to end the U.S. backing of those wars. During the first Trump administration, in the wake of the Muslim ban, we took this movement up on college and university campuses with a focus on protecting undocumented students and immigrant students and collaborating with immigrant rights coalitions in our communities. The National Sanctuary Campus Network came together this past December, because we know that all who are defined as outsiders to the MAGA state are targets. None of us is safe. Sanctuary on college campuses, the basic idea that it should be possible to study and teach and express political ideas freely without fear of unlawful detention or deportation is, believe it or not, a contested idea. When we first started organizing around Sanctuary at NYU many years ago, we were told we're already a Sanctuary campus, just in everything but the name. And then when we said, we'll take the name, they said, well, that might be making a promise we can't keep, which was a little closer to the truth. Now administrators all across the country are trying to adopt a stance of neutrality or civility, but their version of neutrality is far from it. It upholds the Palestine exception to speech and critical inquiry. It upholds the banning of trans people from public life. Caving to Trump directives on DEI, social justice, and climate justice is far from neutral. In fact, it's taking us backward, creating restrictions on what we can study and how we can collectively transform university spaces. But let's be clear, it's not that our universities cannot make themselves sanctuary to all students. It's that they will not, as Columbia University has shown us most dramatically by enabling the detention of Mahmoud Khalil this weekend. So while faculty and students continue to push our administrations, we've also been building sanctuary among ourselves, because it's not just something we demand, it's something we have to make. And because of how important we are to each other, I want to acknowledge that we're living in a time of great fear, and to take a minute to acknowledge the courage of Mahmoud Khalil and all our students who are protesting against genocide in the face of this fear. And to ask that those of us who are faculty and have power and privilege to do so stand with them and take on some of that risk with them. The poet June Jordan, Barnard alumna, identified this courage when she addressed Columbia students sitting outside the steps of Hamilton Hall, which they had renamed Mandela Hall, in 1985, protesting South African apartheid. She said to them, "And that is what you, the students of Columbia, say to all Americans as you sustain this protest. Fear of reprisals stops here with my body. Tyrannical rule and tyrannical force stops here with my body. Reprisals may come, tyranny may continue, but tyrannical rule and tyrannical force will have to deal with me, with my body, with my open and speaking big mouth, as long as I am alive." And it's in this spirit that we organize across the U.S. and Canada now to demand to become sanctuary campuses. Sanctuary campus means the end of war and occupation of Palestine. It means no ICE on or around our campus. It means no threats of deportation against international students, faculty, and staff. Sanctuary campus means we can critically study systems of oppression, including racism, colonialism, heteropatriarchy, and transmisogyny. It means college should be free. Sanctuary campus means we try to build a free and just world by dismantling our campus's complicity in war and oppression. And sanctuary campus means we keep us safe. Free Mahmoud Khalil.
Thank you. Our next speaker is Jamie Beeren, Chief Executive Officer of Bend the Arc Jewish Action.
Hi, good evening, everyone. My name is Jamie Beeren. I'm the CEO of Bend the Arc. We are the largest national Jewish organization that works exclusively on domestic policy. And we're a multiracial, multi-ethnic, intergenerational movement who is rising up for an American future in which all of us are free and thriving. A future free from white supremacy, xenophobia, anti-Semitism, and racism. I'm also a graduate of the Columbia Business School and Institute for and UJA Federation. I have a certificate from the Columbia Business School nonprofit program. And before I jump into my prepared remarks, I have some exciting news to share, which is that it is being reported that a judge has enjoined Mahmoud's removal until the court has the opportunity to consider the petition that's been filed on his behalf in federal court. And this is good news. And we still have to keep fighting, both to ensure that he is released and to protect free speech and oppose this broader mass deportation agenda. And I am here today because I know in my bones as an American Jew how dangerous it is when the government starts abducting legal residents that they disagree with. And I know how doubly dangerous it is when they are claiming to do that in the name of Jewish safety. If this administration truly cared about Jewish people or wanting to end anti-Semitism, it would be upholding our freedoms to speak, study, and stand up for what we believe in. Abducting Mahmoud Khalil and tearing him away from his family is an affront to freedom and safety for all of us, Jewish people very much included. This is a blatant example of how this administration uses anti-Semitism as a smokescreen to enact its plans to bully, blame, and ban people, plans that have nothing to do with Jews or our safety. At Bend the Arc, we have devoted much of our organizational time, resources, and power towards the work of ending anti-Semitism wherever it comes from. We do this because we understand how damaging anti-Semitism is for Jewish people, for this country, and for all of us. But let's be clear, abducting Mahmoud does nothing to make Jews safer. In fact, it is just another way that the MAGA movement is using anti-Semitism to generate division and fear so that they can continue to grow their power and wealth for themselves and for their corporate cronies. All anti-Semitism is unacceptable. But this strategy, which we call smokescreen anti-Semitism, is particularly dangerous because it is used by people who have tremendous power. The same people who are trying to get away with using Nazi salutes from their biggest platforms are claiming to care about Jewish people and our needs, all as a cover for their despotic plans to harm all of us, as cover for their mass deportation agenda, which the vast majority of American Jews oppose. Jewish people will not be used as an excuse to justify MAGA plans to tear families apart. We know where that kind of division ends up. We are going to call Trump's bluff. We demand that Mahmoud be released from custody and returned to his family immediately with his green card intact. And we know that the only way we can truly end anti-Semitism is by locking arms across religions, races, immigration status, and gender, and insisting that freedom and safety for all is truly for all of us, no exceptions. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for coming. We have one more speaker, Rabbi Rachel Goldenberg, the senior rabbi of Malchut, and we'll have a press availability afterwards.
Good evening. I'm Rabbi Rachel Goldenberg. I'm rabbi of Malchut, which is a congregation in Queens. But what really brings me here today as well is the fact that I am a fellow alumna of Columbia College of 1997. And my heart is broken. I and many in the Jewish community could not be more deeply troubled by the Trump administration's detention of Mahmoud Khalil without due process, as well as their cancellation of $400 million in grants and contracts to Columbia University, claiming as their reason the school's continued inaction in the face of persistent harassment of Jewish students. This morning, reading about Mahmoud's detention and learning about his wife, that she's 8 months pregnant, I felt physically ill. I cannot imagine the fear and worry that he and his wife must be feeling right now, and I just want to take a moment to extend all of our prayers and care and support to him and to his whole family. These actions threaten democracy and the rule of law and endanger the entire system of higher education without making Jewish students any safer. Anti-Semitism is real. It exists in this country. It exists in all sorts of political movements. It even exists at Columbia. And it is also true that the majority of students who have taken part in the campus protests, including many Jewish students, did so peacefully and because they wanted the war in Gaza to end. It did not come from a place of anti-Semitism. If the Trump administration was actually concerned about fighting anti-Semitism, they would not be halting the work of the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, which is the body charged with such investigations. Nor would they be platforming white nationalists or those who perform Nazi salutes. It breaks my heart as a Jew who found my path to the rabbinate in large part due to my experience of rich and joyful Jewish life at Columbia, to witness how the Trump administration is targeting my alma mater and using the pretext of Jewish safety to move forward their xenophobic and authoritarian agendas. I am also angry and ashamed that the university has not stood up to these assaults on civil liberties and the rule of law. This week, the Jewish community marks the holiday of Purim. We celebrate the biblical story of how Queen Esther saved Persian Jews from destruction by the king's xenophobic minister, Haman. Queen Esther, herself a Jew, risks her life to reveal her identity, to speak up and protect her people. Today, the Trump administration is looking to a right-wing strategy that they have called by her name, Project Esther, which is an addendum to Project 2025, as they carry out these actions against Columbia University and Mahmoud Khalil. Project Esther weaponizes Jewish fear to drive a wedge between Jews and liberatory movements. Today, we here, standing here, invoke the true Queen Esther and stand up to the forces who would use our safety as a pretext to shut down legal, peaceful student protests, to detain an expectant father and green card holder, to suppress the movement for Palestinian liberation, and to destroy higher education. Today, we call for Mahmoud Khalil's immediate release. We call on Columbia to stand with us in drawing courage from Queen Esther's example, to resist fear, to resist intimidation, and to say no to collaborating with Trump's authoritarian agenda.
Thanks very much, everyone. That's the end of our planned speakers. If you want to stick around and spread out and speak to any folks, I can send them your way. But now is probably a good time to collect your microphones. Thanks. Thanks very much for coming.
Oh, absolutely.
If you would like to interview anyone, any of the
We'll
speakers
see.
further,
We
let
have
me
to
know.
go live at 6.
Oh boy. Nick. Hi, Sophie. Nice to finally